routine field trip turns into a hostage nightmare. One human maintenance worker stands between a dozen fragile alien children and ruthless mercenaries. She didn't have weapons or tactical training. She just had human stubbornness, a heavy titanium wrench, and a promise that no kid was dying on her watch. Sarah Jenkins wiped a streak of black hydro grease from her forehead, leaving a dark smudge across her pale skin. She was 32, a structural engineer from Chicago, and currently 300 light years from home, elbow deep in the atmospheric scrubbers of Aegis Station. The station was a massive, rotating diplomatic hub, a neutral zone where dozens of species mingled in relative peace. For Sarah, it was just another Tuesday. Down in the concourse below her maintenance catwalk, a school group was making its way through the botanical gardens. They were Zethiri, an avian crystalline species known for their brilliant intellects and notoriously fragile physiology. Their bones were hollow, their skin a delicate lattice of silicon and carbon. To a human, they looked like walking stained glass windows wrapped in feathers. Because Zethiri names were a complex series of resonant chimes that human vocal cords couldn't replicate, the station's universal translator network automatically localized their identifiers into culturally familiar formats to prevent cognitive dissonance. Thus, the harassed-looking teacher trying to keep them in line registered in Sarah's earpiece as Mr. Bradley. "All right, children, stay close to your designated buddy." Mr. Bradley's translated voice trilled over the ambient noise of the concourse. "Toby, please stop trying to touch the Terran fly traps." "Samantha, hold Leo's hand." Sarah chuckled softly, tightening a bolt on the scrubber housing. Kids were kids, no matter what star system they hailed from. She packed her tools into her heavy canvas bag, slinging it over her shoulder. She was just reaching for the access ladder when the station shuddered. It wasn't a minor tremor. It was a violent, teeth-rattling convulsion that threw Sarah hard against the guardrail. The lights flickered, died, and were instantly replaced by the sickly crimson glare of emergency strobes. A second later, the sound hit a deafening, concussive boom that sucked the air out of her lungs. "Hull breach," Sarah's mind supplied, her heart instantly kicking into overdrive, but the automated bulkheads didn't slam shut. Instead, the heavy blast doors at the far end of the concourse were blown entirely off their hinges. Through the smoke and raining debris marched a squad of figures clad in heavy, scarred power armor. They weren't station security. They were Krellan mercenaries, reptilian brutes from the Outer Rim, infamous for piracy and slaving. They moved with terrifying precision, fanning out across the botanical garden, their plasma rifles raised. Panic erupted. Tourists and diplomats scrambled for the exits. The Krellan fired warning shots into the ceiling, bringing down showers of sparks and glass. "Nobody moves," roared the lead mercenary, his voice booming through the station's hijacked PA system. "Secure the perimeter. Locate the high-value targets." Sarah froze on the catwalk, peering through the metal grating. Directly below her, the Zethiri school group was huddled in terror behind a shattered decorative fountain. Mr. Bradley was on the ground, pinned beneath a massive chunk of fallen masonry from the ceiling. His crystalline arm was cracked, leaking a luminescent blue fluid. "Mr. Bradley!" little Toby cried out, his feathers puffed up in sheer terror. One of the Krellan mercenaries turned toward the sound, his reptilian eyes narrowing behind his visor. He marched toward the fountain, his heavy boots cracking the tiled floor. Well, well. Sector Command said the ambassador's clutch would be touring the gardens today. Bag them, leave the adult. Sarah's blood ran cold. This wasn't a random raid. It was a targeted kidnapping. The children of high-ranking Zethiri diplomats were in that group. The Krellan were going to take them, ransom them, and likely kill anyone who got in their way. She looked at her tool bag. She looked at the heavy wrench in her hand. She was just an engineer. She wasn't a soldier. The logical survivalist part of her brain screamed at her to crawl back into the ventilation shaft, to wait for station security. But as the Krellin mercenary reached out to grab Samantha, lifting the fragile child by her collar and ignoring her terrified shrieking, the human instinct took over. Earth was a Class 9 death world. Humans had evolved dodging predators, surviving ice ages, and fighting tooth and nail for every inch of survival. When a human saw a child in danger, logic took a backseat to millions of years of mammalian protective instinct. Adrenaline flooded Sarah's system. Her vision tunneled. Her breathing slowed. She didn't climb down the ladder. She jumped the 12 feet from the catwalk, landing squarely on the Krellin mercenary's armored shoulders. The sheer kinetic force of a dense, 150-pound human dropping from that height sent the brute crashing to the floor. Samantha tumbled from his grasp, shrieking. Before the mercenary could recover, Sarah swung her titanium wrench with every ounce of her strength. She bypassed the heavy chest plates and aimed directly for the joint of his helmet, where the armor was thinnest. The sickening crunch of breaking bone and shattered visors echoed over the screams. The Krellin went limp. "Come on!" Sarah yelled, her voice raw. She dropped beside Mr. Bradley. The masonry pinning him easily weighed 300 pounds. For a Zathiri, it was an immovable mountain. For a human running on pure adrenaline, it was just a heavy lift. She braced her boots against the floor, wedged her hands under the stone, and screamed as she deadlifted the block. Her muscles burned, her spine screaming in protest, but the stone lifted just enough. "Move!" Sarah barked. Toby and Leo grabbed their teacher by his uninjured arm and pulled him clear. Sarah dropped the stone, gasping for breath. She turned to the children, her eyes wild but focused. 12 tiny, fragile alien faces stared back at her, trembling. "Who are you?" Mr. Bradley wheezed, clutching his side. "Maintenance," Sarah said grimly, picking up her wrench. "We need to go. Now, into the access tunnels. They won't fit in power armor." "Hey!" a voice roared from across the garden. 2 more Krellin mercenaries had spotted the downed guard and were bringing their weapons to bear. "Run!" Sarah shoved the kids toward the disguised maintenance hatch built into the garden's retaining wall. She punched her override code into the keypad, slamming her fist on the release. The panel slid open, revealing a dark, narrow corridor of pipes and wires. She shoved Mr. Bradley and the kids inside, turning back just as a plasma bolt seared through the air, melting the wall inches from her face. The heat blistered her cheek, but she barely felt it. She dove into the dark tunnel, slamming the heavy steel hatch shut behind her and manually destroying the locking mechanism with her wrench. They were in the walls, but the station was crawling with mercenaries, and the nightmare was just beginning. The maintenance shafts of Aegis Station were never designed for passenger comfort. They were claustrophobic, sweltering arteries of exposed wiring, humming coolant pipes, and grated walkways suspended over deep drops into the station's lower decks. The air smelled of ozone, copper, and recycled sweat. Sarah clicked on her shoulder-mounted work light, casting a harsh white beam into the gloom. Behind her, the soft, terrified chimes of the Zathiri children echoed in the narrow space. The translator matrix converted the sounds into a chorus of human whimpers and cries. "Keep moving," Sarah urged, keeping her voice low and steady. "Watch your step on the gratings. Don't touch the red pipes. They carry superheated plasma exhaust." I can't walk well," Mr. Bradley gasped. He was leaning heavily against the curved metal wall, his luminescent blue blood staining his uniform. "My respiratory lattice is compromised." The shockwave. Sarah stopped and knelt beside him. She pulled a roll of industrial binding tape from her bag. It wasn't medical grade, but it would hold a hull breach together, so it would have to do for a rib cage. "Hold still," she instructed, rapidly wrapping the tape around his torso to stabilize the cracked, crystalline structure. "You shouldn't have stopped for us, human," Mr. Bradley whispered, his eyes dimming. "They are the Garm faction Krellin. They are merciless. You have forfeited your own life. Name's Sarah. And back on Earth, we don't leave kids behind. Ever." She finished the wrapping and patted his shoulder gently. We're going to bypass Sector 4 entirely. I know these vents. We can reach the communication hub in Sector 6 and call for an external evacuation. She tapped the comms unit on her wrist. Static hissed through her earpiece before a broken voice cut through. Repeat. Security teams to the promenade. We are overwhelmed. They have heavy weapons. Control. This is Jenkins, engineering maintenance, Sarah whispered urgently. Do you copy? A pause. Then a frantic voice answered. Jenkins? Are you crazy? Get off the comms. They're slicing our network. Who is your supervisor? David, she replied. David from logistics. Listen to me. I have a class of 12 Zethiri children and 1 wounded adult. We are in the sub-level vents, heading towards Sector 6. I need a security escort at Junction 42. Junction 42? David's voice cracked. Sarah, Sector 6 is gone. They blew the life support nodes. The Krellin aren't just taking hostages, they're locking down the whole station. Someone inside gave them our defense grid codes. They knew exactly where the ambassador's children would be. Sarah's blood ran cold for the second time that day. An inside job. There is no security escort coming, Sarah, David said, his voice thick with despair. We're barricaded in command. You are completely on your own. Hide the kids. Turn off your beacon. May God be with you. The channel went dead. Sarah stared at the comms unit, completely on her own. 12 fragile kids, 1 wounded teacher, and a station full of heavily armed, armor-plated reptilian mercenaries looking for a payday. Miss Sarah? A tiny voice squeaked. She looked down. Little Samantha was looking up at her, her large, multifaceted eyes reflecting the beam of Sarah's flashlight. Are the bad men going to find us? Sarah swallowed the lump of absolute terror sitting in her throat. She forced a confident, lopsided smile onto her face. Not a chance, sweetheart. This is my house. I know every pipe, wire, and loose floorboard in this whole station. They're stuck in the hallways like sitting ducks. We're the ghosts in the walls. A loud metallic clang reverberated through the tunnel. It came from behind them. The hatch Sarah had destroyed was being cut open. The brilliant blue sparks of a thermal lance began to shower through the darkness. Move, Sarah hissed, ushering the kids forward. Fast and quiet. Go, go, go. They scurried down the grate. The Krellin were too large to walk upright in the tunnels, meaning they would have to crouch, slowing them down. But they had thermal optics and heavy armor. Follow the yellow emergency striping on the floor, Sarah told Toby, who was the oldest of the kids. Take Mr. Bradley. When you reach a 4-way intersection with a big green pressure valve, stop and hide behind the condenser units. Do not make a sound until I get there. Where are you going? Mr. Bradley asked, panic rising in his voice. I need to close the front door, Sarah said flatly. She waited until the children were around the bend, their soft footsteps fading into the hum of the station. Then she opened her canvas tool bag. She didn't have guns. She didn't have grenades. But she had a master override tablet, a wrench, and an intimate knowledge of exactly how much pressure a Class 4 coolant pipe could take before it violently ruptured. She climbed onto a cluster of elevated pipes, wedging herself in the shadows above the main catwalk. She waited. Minutes later, heavy, scraping footsteps echoed down the tunnel. 2 Krellin mercenaries, stripped of their bulky outer shoulder plates to fit in the shaft, were advancing. Their thermal rifles swept the darkness. I smell them, one of the mercenaries hissed, his reptilian tongue flicking out of his helmet's rebreather. The avian blood, and something else. Something acidic. That would be human sweat, Sarah thought grimly. As the 2 mercenaries passed directly beneath her, Sarah didn't hesitate. She swung her heavy wrench overhead, smashing it down onto the locking mechanism of the primary coolant release valve, directly above the mercenaries. The valve snapped. Instantly, a geyser of supercooled liquid nitrogen blasted out at 3,000 psi. The Krellin shrieked as the freezing liquid hit their armor, instantly dropping the ambient temperature in the tunnel to negative 60 degrees. Their reptilian biology, already sluggish in the cold, seized up completely. The thermal visors on their helmets cracked under the rapid temperature shift. Sarah dropped down behind them. As the first mercenary tried to turn, blinded by the freezing fog and his cracked visor, Sarah swung the wrench like a baseball bat, shattering his knee joint. He went down with a roar of pain. The second Krellin swung his rifle blindly. The heavy metal stock caught Sarah in the ribs. She heard a sickening crack and was thrown backward against the wall, all the air rushing from her lungs. Searing pain exploded in her side. A human rib, broken. The mercenary loomed over her, raising his rifle to fire. Through the pain, Sarah's survival instinct flared into pure, unfiltered rage. She didn't retreat. She lunged forward, driving the handle of her wrench directly up under the chin of his helmet, straight into the soft, unarmored seal of his rebreather. The metal punctured the suit, severing the Krellin's breathing tubes. He dropped the rifle, clutching his throat as he choked on his own toxic atmospheric mix. Sarah shoved him aside, gasping in agony as she clutched her side. She looked down at the two incapacitated mercenaries. Her hands were shaking violently. The reality of what she had just done, what a human body was capable of when pushed to the absolute brink, was terrifying. She picked up one of the Krellin thermal rifles. It was incredibly heavy, clearly not designed for human hands, but she slung it over her shoulder anyway. She limped down the tunnel, clutching her broken ribs, her breath hitching with every step. When she finally reached the four-way intersection, 12 little heads popped out from behind the condenser units. Toby ran up to her, his translated voice filled with awe. We heard a loud noise. Are you okay, Miss Sarah? You're leaking water from your face. Sarah wiped the cold sweat from her brow, offering a pained, bloody smile. I'm fine, Toby. Just human radiator fluid. Let's keep moving. We've got a long way to go to get out of here. She checked the digital schematic on her tablet. The only remaining viable path to safety. The only place where the Krellin couldn't slice into the station's network and track them was the old, abandoned zero-gravity construction scaffolding on the exterior of the hull. To save the kids, Sarah Jenkins was going to have to take them outside. The airlock staging room was stark white and smelled of stale ozone. Sarah punched the manual override on the heavy blast doors, sealing them inside the prep bay. She leaned against the bulkhead, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps as the adrenaline began to ebb, leaving behind the throbbing agony of her broken ribs. All right, listen up, Sarah panted, turning to the terrified Zethiri children and the pale, trembling Mr. Bradley. She limped over to a row of emergency lockers, yanking the handles down. Inside were neatly folded stacks of emergency environmental spheres, essentially heavy-duty, oxygen-filled hamster balls made of a NASA-grade Kevlar weave polymer designed to keep fragile species alive in a vacuum. We are going outside, Sarah said, pulling the spheres out and tossing them to the floor. Mr. Bradley's luminescent eyes widened in horror. The exterior hull? Sarah, we are not void-rated. The ambient radiation, the lack of gravity, my students will be terrified. They'll be dead if we stay in here, Sarah countered bluntly, her tone leaving no room for argument. The Krellin are slicing the internal bulkheads, but they won't follow us into the void. Their armor is designed for heavy infantry combat, not zero-gravity maneuvering. We take the old construction scaffolding around the outer ring, bypass the compromised sectors, and reach the central comms relay. She began unzipping the spheres, ushering the children inside one by one. The spheres automatically inflated, sealing the kids in a pressurized, breathable environment. Sarah moved to the heavy maintenance locker at the end of the room. She pulled out her EVA rig, a bulky yellow and black industrial suit manufactured by a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin back on Earth. It was heavily armored against micrometeorites, equipped with magnetic boots, and built for brute force labor, not combat. She stepped into the suit, the internal servos whining as she locked the heavy helmet into place. Her HUD flickered to life, bathing her face in a soft green glow. She grabbed a coil of high-tensile synthetic carbon tether from the wall and began clipping it to the designated D-rings on each of the children's spheres. chaining them together like a string of fragile pearls. She clipped the final carabiner to Mr. Bradley's suit, and then attached the lead line directly to the heavy winch on her own chest plate. "Do not let go of the tether," Sarah commanded, her voice broadcasting clearly through their internal comms. "Do not look down. Look at my back. Only my back." Suddenly, her private comms channel crackled. It wasn't the open emergency frequency. It was a direct, encrypted line. "Sarah Jenkins, this is Director Thomas, Chief of Station Operations." Sarah paused, her hand hovering over the airlock cycle button. "Director, where are you?" David told me command was locked down. "It is." Thomas's voice was remarkably calm, lacking the panicked edge of a man under siege. "Which is why I need you to listen to me very carefully, Sarah. You are currently in Airlock 4, preparing for an unauthorized EVA. I need you to stand down and unlock the staging room doors." Sarah frowned, her mind racing. "Sir, I have the ambassador's kids. The Krellin are hunting them. If I open these doors—" "The Krellin are acting under my negotiated terms, Jenkins," Thomas snapped, his composed facade breaking. "The Zethiri homeworld sits on the largest unmined deposit of quantum lattice crystals in the sector. They refused our trade agreements. This is a sanctioned extraction. We take the kids, we force the treaty, nobody gets hurt. If you walk out that airlock, you ruin 3 years of covert planning. I will have you court-martialed, stripped of your pension, and thrown in a deep space penal colony." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. The missing security codes, the delayed response. It wasn't just a raid. It was a Black Ops corporate extraction, backed by corrupted station brass. "You sold out a bunch of kids for mining rights?" Sarah whispered, her blood boiling. "It's just business, Sarah. Unlock the door." "Go to hell, Thomas," Sarah snarled. She raised her stolen Krellin thermal rifle and fired a point-blank blast into the airlock's internal control panel, completely fusing the circuitry. No one was opening those doors from the inside. She slammed her fist onto the manual airlock cycle button. The heavy inner doors slid shut. The warning klaxons blared, and the air was violently sucked from the chamber. As the outer doors parted, the infinite, terrifying majesty of the cosmos was revealed. Aegis Station hung against a backdrop of 1 billion glittering stars, a massive metal wheel slowly spinning in the void. "Magnets engaged," Sarah muttered to herself. She stepped out onto the exterior scaffolding. Her heavy boots locked onto the metal grating with a reassuring thunk. "All right, kids, nice and slow. Follow the pull." She began to walk, dragging the chain of floating spheres behind her. It was agonizing work. In zero gravity, the spheres were weightless, but they still had mass. Every time a child panicked and shifted, the tether jerked, pulling painfully against Sarah's broken ribs. They were halfway across the exposed scaffolding when the Krellin finally breached the staging room behind them. Sarah looked back over her shoulder. 3 massive mercenaries were standing behind the reinforced glass of the staging room's observation deck, staring out at her in pure frustration. Director Thomas stood behind them, his face purple with rage. Through the vacuum of space, Sarah couldn't hear them, but she saw the lead Krellin raise a heavy, shoulder-mounted disruptor cannon. He wasn't aiming at her. He was aiming at the reinforced glass window, keeping him inside the station. "He's insane!" Mr. Bradley's voice shrieked over the comms. "He's going to blow the window!" "Brace!" Sarah screamed. She dropped to her knees, slamming her hands against the grating and activating her suit's emergency surface lock clamps. The glass shattered. Even in the silence of space, the explosive decompression was a terrifying spectacle. A massive plume of debris, oxygen, and loose equipment violently erupted from the station. The sheer force of the escaping atmosphere hit Sarah like a hurricane, threatening to tear her off the scaffolding. The tether snapped taut, the children's spheres caught in the outward slipstream, bouncing wildly. The Krellin mercenary who had fired the shot was instantly sucked out into the void, his heavy armor no match for the vacuum physics. He tumbled silently past Sarah, flailing helplessly as he drifted into the black. Director Thomas had wisely strapped himself to a bulkhead, but the remaining mercenaries were thrown to the deck, desperately clinging to the floor grates. Sarah's suit alarms wailed. Her clamps were groaning under the strain of holding herself and 13 other people against the artificial hurricane. "Hold on," she grunted, her muscles screaming, her vision blurring at the edges. After 30 agonizing seconds, the staging room was fully voided. The violent slipstream died. Sarah unspooled her winch, pulling the terrified floating children back down to the scaffolding. "Everyone okay?" she rasped. A chorus of frightened but affirmative chimes echoed in her helmet. "Good. Let's finish this." It took them another torturous hour to reach the station's primary communications array. Sarah's suit was flashing red, her oxygen levels dangerously low from the physical exertion. She bypassed the station's compromised network, manually splicing her suit's distress beacon directly into the massive dish's power feed. She didn't just call for local security. She broadcasted an unencrypted, sector-wide mayday on all Terran Alliance and Zethari diplomatic channels, attaching the audio logs of Director Thomas's confession. Less than 20 minutes later, the dark space surrounding Aegis Station tore open. The USS Nimitz, a Terran dreadnought, translated out of slipspace directly off the station's port bow, flanked by a dozen sleek Zethari interceptors. The sight of the massive, bristling Terran warship was the most beautiful thing Sarah had ever seen. Drop pods rained down onto the station's hull, deploying heavily armed Terran Marines. "Evac secured." A crisp, military voice crackled over Sarah's comms. "We have you on scopes, Jenkins. Good work, Marine." "Not a Marine," Sarah whispered, her eyes finally fluttering shut as the adrenaline completely abandoned her. "Just maintenance." She collapsed, the stars spinning away into darkness. Sarah woke up to the smell of sterile linen and the soft, rhythmic hum of high-end medical equipment. She was lying in a hyperbaric healing bed. Her ribs didn't hurt anymore. She turned her head to see a towering Zethari male standing by the window, his plumage a stunning display of emerald and gold. He turned, his crystalline face shifting into a soft expression. "Ah, the slumbering Titan awakens," the Zethari said. The translator localized his name as Ambassador Wright. "The kids?" Sarah rasped, her throat dry. "Safe. Unharmed, save for their nerves," the ambassador said, stepping closer. He bowed low, a deeply significant gesture in his culture. "Because of you, Miss Jenkins, you did what our own security forces failed to do. You protected the future of our world. What about Thomas? And the Krellin? Arrested by your Terran military. Your broadcast of his confession caused quite the diplomatic incident. The corporation backing him is being dismantled as we speak." The ambassador smiled, a trilling sound like wind chimes. "You should also know that your suit's camera feed was attached to that distress beacon." Sarah froze. "Oh no. Oh yes." The footage of a solitary human maintenance worker, armed only with a wrench and a localized thermal rifle, outsmarting heavily armed mercenaries and successfully dragging 13 people across the exterior hull of a compromised station during explosive decompression. Well, it has been playing on every news network from Earth to the galactic core. Sarah groaned, pulling the blanket over her face. "I just wanted to fix the air scrubbers." "I am afraid your days of quiet maintenance are over, Miss Jenkins," Wright chuckled. "In Zethari culture, saving a child binds you to their family forever. You are now officially considered an honorary matriarch of the High Flight. Furthermore, the Terran Alliance has dubbed your explosive decompression tactic the Jenkins Maneuver. They are already updating their tactical manuals." Sarah pulled the blanket down, staring at the ceiling. She was a mechanic from Chicago. She liked quiet spaces, well-oiled machines, and union breaks. Now, she was a galactic hero, a Zethari matriarch, and a military textbook example. The door to the medical bay hissed open. A dozen tiny, fragile Zethari children peered into the room, holding handmade crystalline flowers. Toby was at the front. "Miss Sarah?" he chirped. "Are you done leaking radiator fluid?" Sarah looked at the kids, remembering the sheer terror in their eyes back in the botanical gardens, and felt a profound, unexpected warmth spread through her chest. She sighed, a genuine smile breaking across her face. "Yeah, Toby, I think I'm all patched up." She might have accidentally become the most famous human in the sector, but as she looked at the kids she had saved, Sarah realized she wouldn't change a damn thing. If you love this story of human grit, sheer stubbornness, and proving that sometimes the best weapon is a heavy wrench and a protective instinct, smash that like button. Share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans, and don't forget to subscribe for more epic humanity fuck yeah stories. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Sarah's boots? See you in the next one.